We continue the shir about Rabbi Arizal, the Shvachei HaRan, story of Rabbi Arizal's journey to Eretz Yisrael. As we've explained previously, Rabbi Arizal was willing to sacrifice everything, including his life, in order to get to Eretz Yisrael, because this was attempted. It had been attempted by the Baal Shem HaKadosh, other tzaddikim before, who had not succeeded in getting to Israel, and this was the prime peak achievement possible. We explained too, Rabbi Arizal's getting to Israel would, in a sense, complete the wishes of Moshe Rabbeinu, who had so much wanted to get there, and now this was his opportunity to get there be'ibur. That means with his soul combining with Rabbi Arizal's and getting there physically too. We told the story of Rabbi Arizal's trip to Istanbul, of the experience there in degrading himself extremely, allowing himself to be insulted, degraded, and belittling himself too in his actions, his own actions. This was for the sake of the aliyah. The fact is that there must be a yerida, a descent, before there is an ascent. Finally, he joined together with one of the chief rabbis of Yerushalmi on a ship leaving Istanbul during the time of war. This was during the time of the Napoleonic War. Napoleon declared war against Turkey, and he had already invaded Egypt, and had gone already towards Israel. At this time, there were no boats traveling then, no ocean voyages or sea voyages, so that there were no boats available. But this Chacham, this chief rabbi, stated that he had a message from heaven. He was going to be buried in Jerusalem, and his ship would arrive safely. So the ship was filled to capacity. The Arizal was one of them too, and he joined this Chacham, this Sephardic rabbi, and they made a sort of a pact, an agreement, to go together to Yerushalmi when they got to Israel. This was the plan. After a number of days, the boat finally, and after a lot of difficulty with storms that arose, with a lot of risks, dangers during this voyage, the boat finally reached the port of Yaffo. It's Jaffa, known as today as Jaffa, Tel Aviv. At that time there was only Jaffa city, the port of Jaffa, of Yaffo. The boat came to dock there, and the people, some of them descended. This chief rabbi of Israel descended there because it was the shortest route to Yerushalayim. Rabbi Arizal wanted to descend too, but the Turks there could not accept Rabbi Arizal as a genuine tourist or settler, since he was dressed in a true European style, long payas, a long frock. They felt that he might be a French spy, and so they refused to let him off the ship. Now, as much pleading as took place, as much attempted bribery, whatever they tried to do, even this Jerusalem chief rabbi could not persuade the Turks, the Arabs, to allow Rabbi Arizal to leave this boat, so he was forced to remain there. It was a bitter disappointment. Momentarily, he had to say farewell to this Chacham, and while staying on this boat, suddenly the boat began to rock. And the waves, this was at the dock, the waves were so high, rose so high, that the boat was in danger of capsizing. There was no physical explanation for this. The captain asked the people on shore, and some of the Sephardic, the old Sephardim, the Chachams, means the rabbis. The Chacham is a Sephardic rabbi. Chacham, especially the night Chachams. And these Sephardic rabbis stated that they have a Kabbalah. It means they have received this information from generation to generation. That exactly at this spot, this was the spot where Yonah, Hanavi, the prophet Yonah, was thrown off the ship and then swallowed by the fish. But because of the fact he was thrown off the ship, therefore the waters here are always turbulent. And that's why at this spot the boat cannot remain. So the captain was forced to pull up anchor and to leave. the boat traveled on until it came to, a couple of days later, it came to the port of Haifa. Now this was on the night, the evening of Zechar B'ris. Zechar B'ris is Erev Rosh Hashanah. Very fittingly, Arizal arrived at Haifa port at this evening of Zechar B'ris, and then they spent the night on aboard ship. In the morning, towards morning, before dawn, they all said Sichos, the special longest Sichos of the year, Erev Rosh Hashanah. And after the Sichos was over, this was, of course, still on board the ship. They had landed in Haifa, opposite Mount Carmel, and facing the cave of Eliyahu Hanavi. There were some here who were in Eretz Yisrael this past summer, and very fittingly, we visited this cave. Arizal spoke a lot about this cave of Eliyahu Hanavi, where Eliyahu Hanavi spent 40 days and 40 nights in Tefillah. They spotted this to Hashem. When they were facing this cave, they said the Sichos are there before dawn. They davened Shachris, and afterwards, after Shachris, they descended from the ship, went on land, and entered into Haifa. At that moment, Arizal realized his greatest wish, his greatest desire in life, his greatest spiritual accomplishment. This was the moment that Arizal had waited for, had strived for, had given his life for, to be able to walk these 4 steps on the sacred soil of Eretz Yisrael. And now this was realized. Arizal said that as soon as he walked these 4 steps, he achieved a peak, a new level of heavenly greatness and kedusha and holiness that was far greater, surpassed to the greatest degree everything he had achieved before. Remember, Arizal at that time was the tzadik emes of the entire world, at a generation which was filled with renowned tzadikim, talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, the holiest miracle workers, lived at that time, and Arizal was the tzadik emes, the holiest tzadik of the world, before he got to Eretz Yisrael. When he arrived there, taking those first 4 steps, he said he then achieved new heavenly levels. His soul soared up to the highest levels of heaven that made him ashamed of what he had known previously. He now reached new greatness in Chachma and wisdom of the Torah. In Bina, this the 50th degree of wisdom was now achieved by Arizal. This was what Moshe Rabbeinu had strived for too. To get to Eretz Yisrael, to achieve this Arizal now had. All this was done with just arriving in Eretz Yisrael, a combination of the tzadik emes, whose soul had craved coming to its origin, coming to rejoining the Shekhinah in Eretz Yisrael. We are speaking about the Shekhinah Elyona, the upper Shekhinah, Yud K, Vav K. The letter K stands for the Shekhinah. The lower Shekhinah is the Vav K. The upper Shekhinah is Yud K, which is Bina. And this Arizal achieved, uniting his neshama, his soul, with the upper Shekhinah Bina, and attaining the 50th degree of wisdom. At that moment, Arizal was filled with a thrill, with a happiness that could not be paralleled. For us to understand this, I would say that it is impossible for a person to understand the true meaning of simcha, of real simcha. I think that there are some who could possibly conceive of a simcha of that type. I was fortunate in achieving a simcha of that kind. I would say that it is a simcha where the person leaves the physical sensation, arrives at something spiritual. First time I ever came to Arizal's Tzion Uman, at that time I could testify honestly that the simcha was so great, it was an ecstasy that could not be described physically. Now this, Arizal stated, he had felt this sensation when he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, and his simcha knew no bounds. This spiritual accomplishment the chachma, the wisdom that was achieved then was more than can be described. Now again, I want to deviate for a moment, in a story that I have never told publicly. I've told it many times privately, those who visit my home. It's something which I believe is very pertinent, very important to clarify, shed light on this whole topic. A good many years ago, I would say about 28 years ago, I experienced my first trip to Eretz Yisrael. At that time, I could possibly write a book, autobiography, on that first trip, because the obstacles, the manias, the difficulties, the hardships that I endured in realizing this trip to Eretz Yisrael were also could sound like fiction. Of course, in no way could they compare, chas v'sholom, to the manias difficulty the Arizal had. The only trip that compares to the Arizal's is, to a degree, Rav Nosson's trip, which took place a few decades later, which story we'll have later on too. At this time, the difficulties were minor in comparison, but too, they entailed, to a degree, miracles. In realizing the fulfillment of this dream to get to Eretz Yisrael, the point was that the purpose, truly, the purpose of my trip to Eretz Yisrael was because I was propelled, I was driven, I was urged on by this story of Rabbeinu Zal's journey, by the kedusha that was involved in it. Rabbeinu Zal said that so much can be accomplished, so much can be reached, a new height in holiness and chachma and wisdom. So I looked forward to this after all these hardships arriving in Eretz Yisrael, especially since I was going then directly to Yerushalmi to visit the tzadik emes, the holiest tzadik of the entire universe, Rabbi Nachman Zal, who officially had accepted the status of being the rabbi of this group too. As he stated before his gestaltes, before his passing, he's told me befedish that clearly that any one of the students that I would have here, he would accept as his students. Now, there's no greater honor than that, because this means that he would use his influence in heaven for the sake of his students and gaining them better results at the heavenly tribunal, Emir Hashem, 120 years from now. So I was directed by him to go straight to Yerushalmi, to come to visit him, to visit Rabbi Nachman. So this journey was one of extreme importance in the sense of kedusha. There was no motive, no physical motive. I was not going as a tourist. I was not going on a pleasure trip or a vacation. It was purely for the sake of achieving this mitzvah of going 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael. Not just as the Gemara says, I want to walk 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael is zecher to Gan Eden. That Rabbeinu says is the lowest reason. There's much more important reasons in Kedusha. So following these instructions, having full faith in the words of Rabbeinu Zal, I made this journey, and finally, after many trials, many difficulties, a lot of sacrifices, I arrived in Eretz Yisrael on Tisha B'Av. I went straight to Rabbi Nachman Zal's home, and the meeting, of course, was one that was so joyous, it was indescribable, for myself at least. And then, after I spent some time there, I finally was able to speak to Rabbi Nachman Zal privately, and I said to him, I have one question to ask. This is the uppermost question of my mind. And I wondered, I hoped that as the tzaddik emes, in his infinite wisdom, he could give me the answer to this question. My question was, very sincerely, in true sincerity, that I had gone through some difficulties getting to Yisrael, but I had traveled with implicit faith in the words of Rabbeinu Zal. And I had expected, in simplicity, that the minute I would get off the plane and walk 4 steps on the soil of Israel, that all the knowledge which I did not have in Gemara, Kabbalah, and Torah would suddenly enter into my mind, and I'd become a baki, pure knowledge to all the facets of Torah. According to this, I figured I'd be ashamed of what I knew before, It wasn't that much that I knew, but I gained so much knowledge that this is, believing the words of the Arizal, I said, this is what I expect. Why not? Let me at least know twice as much Gemara as I knew before. And yet when I arrived on the soil of Israel in the airport of Lod at that time, my trip to Yerushalmi, till I stood before Rabbi Nachman, I searched in my mind for additional pages of Gemara, for additional Sfarim. I couldn't think of any new item in Torah Chachma that I didn't have before. Where was this vast mountain of knowledge that should open up to me, this heavenly wisdom? I asked this of Rabbi Nachman very sincerely, in as humble a manner as possible, and he took this question very seriously. He didn't laugh at it. He just smiled and said, my reply is, he said, that it is not a silly question as one would expect. Because, he said, very frankly, he himself had arrived in Yerushalmi 30 years prior to that, and he too had expected the same thing. He felt that when he would arrive in Eretz Yisrael, then surely he'd gain much more knowledge than he had before. Now, he could not deny, he said, that he did have a large gain, which of course is understood for a tzadik in his caliber. However, he said, as far as the knowledge is concerned, as far as additional heavenly chachma, you must believe, he said, if you have this faith in Torah, you must believe that this knowledge, this holiness has come to you. You have gained it. But it has been gained by your neshama, your soul. And because you and your soul are so far apart, you don't seem to converse, you don't seem to hit it up together, therefore you cannot feel what your neshama feels. But rest assured that your neshama, your soul, in completing this journey, has gained tremendously big kedusha. And this will help you in the future. And this, of course, is the answer to a similar question that would seem to strike every person who goes there for this purpose. Know that if you go to Eretz Yisrael with this sincere motive, pure motive, going there for the sake of kedusha alone, that your neshama will definitely gain, will definitely multiply in holiness, it will become much greater than previously, and then slowly you'll derive of this kedusha yourself. Your mind and your heart will be purified gradually to a point, if you accept this of course, to a point where you too will rise in kedusha. This was the answer of Arizal. Of course, it is understood that this is for ourselves. Rabbi Arizal makes this point clearer. Rabbi Arizal says that the holier a person is, the less space there is between his body and his soul. Because what is meant by holiness? The soul is Kodesh. The soul is holy. It's just the body that has its physical, animal type of desires. If a person can purify his body, not just his heart and mind, but every one of his 248 organs, purify them to devote themselves, everyone is going to devote themselves to the service of Hashem, then the organs of the body become as pure as the same corresponding organs of the soul. When the body becomes that pure, the body is as tahir, as kodesh, as the neshama, then the guf too, the body too, can feel the spiritual, the essence of the spiritual that the neshama feels. And this is how a tzadik who is holy enough can actually visit heaven, because his body is that pure. This is the secret of the Anavi, rising up to heaven, going into his chariot, this fiery chariot rising to heaven, because his guf was as pure as his neshama. Well, this was the accomplishment of Rabbi Arizal, who was that pure, that he felt it physically, because there was no difference between physical and spiritual as far as Rabbi Arizal was concerned. So he felt this gain immediately, and then this was on the morning of Erev Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Arizal said, is his Yom Tov. That afternoon, at Chatzos, just after Chatzos, just after noon, Rabbi Arizal went to the mikveh, and this, of course, proves the point. Arizal says that the main time for mikveh, Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, Erev Rosh Hashanah, is exactly at noon, as close afternoon, as close to noon as possible. So the Arizal went to make Rosh Hashanah, and then he stayed in shul until at night. At night, he, after davening Rosh Hashanah, to which the Arizal considers the finale of the 10 days of Teshuva. For a tzadik, the Gemara says, Rosh Hashanah at night, the first moment, a tzadik is already written in and sealed into the book of life. The persons who are not tzaddikim have to go through 10 days of Teshuva, and their time for sealing is on Yom Kippur. And Russia, of course, is sealed into the book of death on Rosh Hashanah itself. It does not mean physical death, it means that his neshama has died. As a shalom. But a tzaddik achieves this the night of Rosh Hashanah. And this is why the Arizal said, if you come to my minyan on Rosh Hashanah, the first night after you finish davening, you can say truthfully to each other, you are written and sealed into the book of life because you are a part of, together with the tzaddikim. So that night when Arizal came home from shul, he said to his Talmud, with simcha, he said to him, Ashrecha, how fortunate are you that you were zecher to be with me on this trip. You have achieved this too. He took out the special note, a note in which he listed all the names of those of his followers who would ask the Arizal to daven for them, and this he did that very first night. He ate the Suda, the meal, with great simcha of the night of Rosh Hashanah. The next morning they went to daven, and davening in shul, shachris, musaf, the kiyas, shofar, and then they went home. They came home for the Rosh Hashanah meal. Arizal appeared to have fallen into a deep, depressive state of mind. Suddenly, he became so sad and seemingly so depressed that there was no way a person could speak to him. He did not speak to any person at all during the next 2 days, during Rosh Hashanah. And this was a mystery. How come that such a great simcha turned into such a sadness so suddenly? R Nosson explains later on that this was the way, the derech of Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman would achieve a very great height. He'd reach the Olam HaAtzilus, the highest of the worlds. He'd be very happy of his accomplishment. But a moment later he'd become very sad and he would say, I know nothing. I know nothing at all, because I know now, having achieved this, that there is something much, much greater, much higher than this. And I shall be sad. I shall strive and battle and do my utmost to reach that higher level. And this was the way of Rabbi Nachman, who never was satisfied on any level, no matter what he had reached. He might have become many times, many-fold greater than the biggest tzaddik in the world next to him. He still was not satisfied. He strove for something higher. Rabbi Nachman was known as one who never remained on one madrega for any time at all. He reached the new madrega, he strived to go still higher. When he got still higher, he went still further and never settled. In fact, we find the most amazing statement of all. The Arizal, who was the master of Kabbalah, states that there are 5 divisions to the neshama, not just 3. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. And above that, there are 2 more divisions, Chaya, Yechida. Yechida is something that is so high, it's above our conception. A person who is a tzaddik can purify his nefesh, and then his ruach, then his neshama. But there are some tzaddikim, very few of course, who can go as high as purifying the Chaya and Yechida. And then, there are different levels for each one. You have a level of the different degrees in the Sfidas, up to the level of Bina, and then Chachma, and then Keser, and so on. The person to purify his highest level, the highest degree of Neshama Yechida, to the point of Keser, that Arizal says no one has ever done that, and will not accomplish that until Mashiach comes. Rabbi Arizal stated that he reached that point, far surpassed that point, much higher than that, and was still not satisfied. He kept on rising higher and higher because he realized, he knew, that Hashem is Ein Sof. Hashem is infinite in His greatness, and therefore there is no limit to how much a person can keep rising much, much more than we can ever imagine. This was the derech of Rabbi Nachman. This is how he became so great. The one tzaddik who was never an oimed, never stopped at a madrega, continued to go higher. This was the secret reason for Rabbi Arizal's sadness on Rosh Hashanah. He got to this high level and then strove to go still higher. We find later on, Rabbi Arizal stated that he reached a point where he could, in a matter of minutes, accomplish more than he did during his entire lifetime. But these minutes were over, he again accomplished the next few minutes more than he did in his entire lifetime, plus what he did in the last few minutes. So that the Rabbi Arizal's greatness is naturally indescribable. We can only say we do not understand, we cannot conceive of his greatness. We could say, Ashreinu, how fortunate we are that we know Rabbi Arizal, and how fortunate are those who have this true, pure emunah in the tzadikim, who are truly mikusha. Now, immediately after the Shoshana, Rabbi Arizal stated that he wanted to return home. He doesn't even want to visit Tzfas and Tiberia. Of course, the plans to go to Yerushalmi were over with. There was no further possibility. Why these plans went awry, why they were not realized, why they were not fulfilled, the Messenger says this was only an act of Hashem. There's no explanation for it, why the Rebbe did not get Yerushalmi. The fact was he did not get there, and now in Haifa, the Arizal said he wants to return home because he had accomplished his mission. The Arizal's Talmud pleaded with the Arizal and said he wanted to feast his eyes on the land, and he wanted to go at least from Haifa to Tzfas and Tiberia, where the great tzaddikim were. Tzfas, where the Arizal was buried. Tiberia, Midon, the place of Rabbi Shimon Yochai's burial. Arizal refused, but he stayed in Haifa a few days longer, and he received a message from the great tzaddikim in Tiberia, begging him to come to visit them for Sichos. Arizal did not do that. He remained in Haifa for Sichos, and during the time, by the way, there was an incident that occurred where in the inn where Arizal stayed, a young Turk came to see Rabbi Arizal, who spoke only Turkish. But no one can understand his words. Arizal has to understand. And he showed a seeming affection to Rabbi Arizal, and then later showed an anger where he threatened to kill Rabbi Arizal. This again turned to affection, and Rabbi Arizal stated this was the greatest danger he'd ever experienced, because this young Turk was the actual Satan himself. A lower person battles with a lower type of angel. The biggest tzadik is confronted with a battle with the Satan himself. We know that the Satan is divided into two parts. There are 70 nations on earth, and these 70 nations are led by Esav and Yishmael. Each one's angel is a leader, a guardian over 35 nations. This one, the Ishmael, whose angel is called Reish Hey Beis, we cannot pronounce the name. This, of course, is the Zeli Umazeh. We have the holy light, the Oer. Against that we have the Zor. The Zor means strange against light, the Gematria. And this Malach of Ishmael was named the Gematria Zor. This was this Turkish stranger, Malach of Ishmael, the stranger who came to Rabbi Arizal, and the time when Rabbi Arizal's life was very much in danger, but he succeeded in escaping from this Turk. Rabbi Arizal was very happy about that he effected this escape. During the Chalamayid Sukkos, Rabbi Arizal and a number of Jews there went to visit the cave of Eliyahu Navi. When he came there, he fell into, again, a seeming melancholy state, sadness. But the Arizal warned always that the person should never be sad. The most important lesson the Arizal imparted was that the person should be always besimcha, and in fact it is not a mitzvah, but a mitzvah gedela, a very great mitzvah for a Jew to be besimcha always. If you are ever besimcha, know that you are doing a mitzvah at that time. And therefore a person who claims to be a follower of Rabbi Arizal if he is ever in a state of atzvus and sadness, he should know that with that act, he has cut himself off from Rabbi Arizal. If a person is ever be atzvus, it doesn't mean at the time of a wedding he's happy. This means at a time, even if there is reason to be sad, chas v'sholom, he must be b'simcha, because that mitzvah cannot be neglected at any time. Mitzvah gedolah. So Rabbi Arizal fell into this sad state, seeming sad state. It was not atzvus chas v'sholom, it was the different type of leiv nishbar, a broken heart, where a person who is humble has a broken heart. Deep, very deep, there is that deep feeling of simcha too. But he was very broken up, and so therefore he would refuse to speak, he would refuse to show any open signs of simcha, and this lasted through simchas Torah, through the akafas. He would not even go into akafa, refused to take a sefer Torah, go to akafa on simchas Torah, and this of course again was due to the fact that he was about to achieve a new height, a new level in kedusha. This we see that after Sukkos, again he wanted to leave, to go back to his hometown, his home city, but his Talmud again began to plead very strongly with Rabbi Arizal, and his pleading was reached such a peak, such a high pitch, that Rabbi Arizal, who was never stubborn, finally acceded, consented to go to Tiberia, and they traveled to Tiberia. There, they were invited by Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal. Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal was the chief rabbi of Tiberia. In fact, he was the head of all the Hasidic Yeshuvim settlements in Eretz Yisrael. We mentioned his name previously, and since he was the head and he recognized the greatness of Rabbi Arizal, he invited Rabbi Arizal to his home. Rabbi Arizal said he could not come yet, but he would come for a Shabbos. He had intended to come, and finally for Shabbos, Pashas Nach, Rabbi Arizal came to Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal and stayed there for Shabbos. That Friday night, Rabbi Arizal stood before Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal, and standing before him, Rabbi Arizal bowed his head. He bowed his head and asked Rabbi Avraham Zal to give him a bracha. Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal leaped back 4 steps in shock, in a state of shock. And he screamed out, "How can I dare to give a bracha to one who is so great a tzadik? It is impossible." This was his humbleness, this was his greatness in recognizing his tzadik emes. However, Rabbi Arizal's Talmud to ask for a bracha was immediately blessed by Rabbi Avraham Zal. That Shabbos, the meal, Rabbi Arizal was asked to speak Divrei Torah. Rabbi Arizal refused, and the words of Torah were spoken by Rabbi Kalisker Zal. The same thing occurred Shabbos morning and Shabbos Shalosh Shudas. But Rabbi Kalisker Zal spoke at these 3 meals, and R Nosson writes that his speaking was with such a slavus, was so fiery, that no one could make out the words he was saying. The words were so high and such a high pitch, they could not make out actually the words he was saying. Only that he completed his statements by saying, "This is the true derech in avodas Hashem, serving Hashem." Rabbi Arizal afterwards praised the Torah of Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal. The fact that Rabbi Arizal said, remember this testimony, Rabbi Arizal stated that I have seen many very great tzaddikim. Rabbi Arizal was raised in the city of Mezhebush, the city of the Baal Shem Tov. He had seen all the great tzaddikim of that time. Rabbi Arizal said, I've seen only one tzaddik in my life who is complete, a complete tzaddik, and that one is Rabbi Avraham Kalisker Zal. Only one who had complete shleimus. Only one ever praised to that extent by Rabbi Arizal. So again, it's very uncanny, very eerie, I find, that there's no comparison naturally, and yet of course we know that Arizal says that every generation, in fact the Gemara says that Shana, every generation has its leaders. The tzaddik of each generation is considered the same as Moshe Rabbeinu in his time. There's no difference. Tzadik today is in a category of Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, the Zohar Kodesh says that Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama goes into the Tzadik of every generation. Each generation has its own tzaddikim who are in that at that time the Tzadik Emes. Now, in my time, my experience, we could say lahavdil, of course, but at the same time, this is a generation which counts for now as well as the one of the past. We have, let's say, in our time, there were tzaddikim too, there are possibly, and yet in this past generation, to speak about true shleimus, true completion, true completeness in Kedusha, I had seen only one. Not that I had seen, but I would state definitely there was only one that was that pure. A pure tzadik emes in every respect was Rabbi Kochav Leivzal, Rabbi Avraham Leivzal. This generation too, the tzadik emes, shleimus, was in Rabbi Avraham Zal. In fact, let us say coincidentally, if you wish, I would say it's not coincidental, I had only one Rebbe in America, also the one Rebbe Muvhak, official Rebbe, who I had considered or recognized as the Godel Hadir in Nigla, and that was the head of the Bialystoker Yeshivas, 70 Yeshivas, which had the central yeshiva in America, the first yeshiva I learned where I got smicha, and that was Rabbi Avraham Yafin Zal. So again, it seems that shleimus is found by Echad Hoya Avraham. Avraham was one alone in his generation, and shleimus, we find there is something about that shleimus in Rabbi Avraham Zal each time. This was the testimony of Arizal about Avraham Kaliska Zal, the head of the yeshivas the head of the yishuv, the settlements of Chassidim and Yisrael throughout. And there Rabbi Zal spent a good deal of time. At that time too, another incident occurred where there was a Mosur. A Mosur means one who informs against Jews to the government of Goyim, gets a Jew in trouble, either having this Jew put to death or having him lose his wealth, his possessions, or causing any kind of harassment to Jews by Goyim, those who inform against Jews. A Jew who informs is called a Musur. The Gemara says that a Musur deserves a death penalty. In fact, in some cases, it's a mitzvah to kill a Musur. There was this Musur who informed against the Jews in Tiberia to the Turkish government, and of course, because he informed, he was elevated to the highest level in the army, and this Musur, for some spiteful reason, wanted to do harm to the Jews in Tiberia, in fact, to wipe them out. And so he received this elevation and came to Tiberia to literally slaughter the Jews there. The Jews were filled with fear, dread, and panic, and somehow he came to Rabbi Zal, and there he suddenly acquired a deep fear, an awe, respect for Rabbi Zal. Rabbi Zal spoke to this Musar and attempted to make this Musar do tshuva, to repent. For a while he had this Musar doing tshuva, and he suddenly fell ill. When he revived himself, he was cured, he stated that he felt he'd been tricked. He's now going to really do harm to the Jews. But immediately afterwards he fell ill again, and this time he died. Rabbi said that there was a problem with this Musar. For one thing, the lives that were endangered in Tiberia, plus the money that was supposed to be brought to the Tiberia central office, and there was a possibility of losing that money. Now, because of Rabbi Zal's intervention, all this was saved. This brought true also a feeling of simcha to Rabbi Zal. He accomplished this for the Jews in Tiberia. Now, the next step Rabbi Zal took was to visit the Menachem Mendel Schneerson in Eretz Yisrael. Being Tiberia is very close to the Odes, the caves, the Tzionim of the great tzaddikim. So they went together, a group, to visit these caves. The first one he went to was Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Zal. There, Rabbi Arizal was filled with an extraordinary degree of simcha. And we can understand this because only Rabbi Arizal knew the true greatness of Shimei Choizal. You know, Rabbi Arizal, Rabbi Nachman ben Simcha, is begimatria Rabbi Shimon ben Yechoy exactly. There is a definite closeness between the two. And so Rabbi Arizal was so filled with simcha, he actually danced. He went to the kiruv there at the cave of Shimei Choizal, and he encouraged all the people to learn Zohar HaKadosh, the words of Shimei Choizal and tefillos. And then they stayed there practically all night. In the morning after davening, they went to different caves, Hillel, Shammai, and they went to the cave of Rabbi Krus Bedoi. Rabbi Krus Bedoi, about whom we just heard a story, Krus Bedoi and his mother, one of the great Tanoim at that time. There was a closeness between Rabbi Krus Bedoi and Shimei Choizal. Rabbi Arizal went there too. And then there was a cave of the Yenuka. The Yenuka is actually there's more than one Yenuka, but one famous one, a child of Rabbi Hamnuna Saba. This Yenuka, the Zohar Kodesh tells many stories about. It was approximately 5 years old, and who was visited by Rabbi Shimon Choizal's Talmidim, and eventually by Rabbi Shimon Choizal himself. This Yenuka taught secrets of Kabbalah, secrets of Torah to Rabbi Shimon Choizal's Talmidim and to Rabbi Shimon Choizal too. He was that great that the Zohar Kodesh explains, the Arizal explains that this Yenuka was actually a person who was born with all his faculties, with all the past knowledge he had in his previous Gilgul, plus the knowledge he retained in heaven too, that he had in heaven. Therefore this Yenuka was so great in Torah, so superior to all living rabbis then. This Yenuka, though, was too great to remain alive, and so he passed away as the Yenuka. His burial place is in Tzfas, and that cave of the Yenuka was a place that was feared by all, because there was a rumor that there was a poisonous snake within the cave of the Yenuka. So no one would enter this cave. Rabbi Arizal came there. They warned him about this cave. Rabbi Arizal descended into the cave himself without the slightest trace of fear, and found no snake in the cave. That was the first time a person entered that cave, and from that time on, people began to visit that cave regularly. This was a number of other caves that Arizal visited, different Mekemes Hakdashim. In each place, different tefillos was said, and the Arizal encouraged them to visit these places and to say tefillos, though at one point or another, there were times that the Arizal again went into this state of seeming sadness, brokenheartedness. This, of course, meant that each time there was a tikkun Rabbi Arizal performed, and a new aliyah he had arrived at. The time Rabbi Arizal spent in Eretz Yisrael, of course, was not a lengthy one. It was not that long. But his stay was cut short because of the fact that the war was at the gates of Eretz Yisrael. In fact, it was moving upwards from the south towards the northern cities, so that the time had come when the entire country would be embroiled in this battle. It was very dangerous for any person to remain there. Those who lived there, of course, were forced to face this danger and would possibly face death. But those who had visited Eretz Yisrael might yet have a chance to escape. So the time came when Rabbi Arizal was forced to leave Eretz Yisrael, and at this point of leaving, at that point began a new series of adventures that were much more filled with risks and dangers than his actual trip to Eretz Yisrael. This is the next chapter which we'll have the next time. And of course, again, our lesson primarily is about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, about the fact that if a person can effect a trip to Eretz Yisrael, then he should let nothing stand in his way. And if a person sees that traveling to Eretz Yisrael entails sacrifices, physical or monetary sacrifices, he should know that his trip is of the highest value. Never allow anything to stop you from realizing the ambition of, as a Jew, walking 4 steps on the sacred soil of Eretz Yisrael. It is much better, of course, if a person can be zecher to move entirely to live in Eretz Yisrael, to breathe the air of Eretz Yisrael, the air of Chachma, and to walk on the soil of Eretz Yisrael always, to walk, to eat, to sleep there. This, of course, is the top realization possible. But at least temporarily, a person should see to it that he must realize the walking of 4 steps in Eretz Yisrael. That is compulsory. No Jew dare live without that realization. We should be zecher to strive to get to Eretz Yisrael, to really arrive there completely with our heart and soul, and to arrive there together at the coming of Mashiach, via tzadik, and to see the Beis Hamikdash Amen v'Amen.